Welcome to M Talk, brought to you by the M Scale, where we talk all things menstruation. We interview the best and brightest working across multiple fields, all with the same mission: to make the lives of people who menstruate a little bit easier. Good morning, my name is Annabelle and I am so ecstatic to welcome you to our podcast all about periods. For those who don't know, I'm the founder of the M Scale, which is a menstrual movement to try and remove period anxiety. So for the past 3 years, I've actually been knee deep in the menstrual justice movement, fighting the good fight to remove period stigma and improve access to products. However, before this, I was a film and television exec, so I know a good story when I see one, and having worked alongside these incredible people doing incredible things in the field of menstruation, I thought they deserve a platform and everyone needs to know what's going on behind the scenes. So let's get into it. As the technology sector continues to grow, people all across the world are using new innovations and wearable technology to help them track, optimize, and thrive in their periods. The FemTech industry was valued at £20 billion in 2020 and has continued to increase exponentially, but at what cost? In this episode, we are talking to Dr. Laura Shipp, an academic specialising in FemTech and privacy. Laura has an extensive background in online privacy. She has served as a postdoctorate research fellow on numerous equity privacy projects, and her PhD focused on the cybersecurity of period tracking apps, using it as a case study to co-develop a feminist understanding of cybersecurity. So she's the perfect person to help us understand just what is going on when we engage with the digital sphere using our personal health data. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. I'm very excited about this conversation. I think the first thing we need to do is we need to let our audience understand exactly what it means when we're talking about privacy data and femtech apps. So in a nutshell, how would you explain it to the everyday person, what your concerns are and what you've researched?
Yeah, well, from my own research, some of the things that I found were often that there's a lot of different players in this app market, whether it's people that, or groups that specifically define themselves as femtech, or even just kind of games companies that might make a period tracking app as another kind of app in their repertoire. But what I found was often within those groups there is really different kind of understandings about what should be private and how particularly period data should be looked after. So often period data wasn't specifically earmarked as point of particular concern or care. And that goes again with the kind of other data that might get inputted into an app alongside your specific cycle, whether that's like some of your kind of like sexual history or practices, whether you're trying for a baby, anything like that. So there was just real kind of discrepancy across the industry about how this stuff gets looked after. And obviously that's a real concern because now we're seeing that there's real risks attached to how your data gets used. So there's kind of even bit kind of more at stake. And that is even worse if you're already part of a marginalised group who could see this data be kind of used against you in different kinds of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a bit more about you and your background, but while we're here, I think it's really important to address the fact that a lot of people, when they think about these period tracking apps and the privacy, if they're familiar with what's happening and the concerns and how data is being used, it's kind of like a potential harm. Everyone thinks like, oh no, this could be used. But I found it really interesting when I was reading your work that governments have already used private data that has been put into period tracking apps or menstrual apps in general. Would you care to share a few examples of that so that people listening can kind of understand that the risk is sort of already there?
Yeah. And this is what I was trying to show throughout my so it took me 5 years to do my PhD, and throughout that time, it always kind of felt like that, like this does have the real potential for harm, and we're already kind of seeing it. But yeah, there are examples like Missouri State collecting people's period data as a way of kind of trying to understand where there could be risk of things like abortion. So that was, again, pre-Roe versus Wade. There's also, again, pre-Roe versus Wade, that there were people collecting geolocation data and using that to, or geofencing data to basically serve people anti-abortion content whilst they were in reproductive healthcare clinics and things like that. So already quite quite kind of dark examples of harms in which these things could be used, or ways that this data around, I guess, your reproductive health choices or your body could be manipulated and create harm. And beyond that, there's also now examples of people who are undocumented, like ICE collecting data. Again, a lot of these are US focused, but like ICE collecting data on periods as a way of then identifying pregnancies to prevent, those pregnancies creating...
the dream babies or
Yeah,
the
exactly. Yeah, I was trying to think what they're called. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's called dream babies. I don't even know if it's still legal. We'll have to look this up and put a note in the podcast.
Yeah.
But babies who were born, even though their parents may be deemed illegal immigrants.
So really quite dark. Again, and these are all examples that have come before, again, in the US, the kind of Trump administration's new version of reality. So yeah, that's obviously then becoming much more serious concerns. There are also examples where apps just kind of look to overreach and collect more data than they need, whether that's like... And often that can be through quite underhand tactics, for example, using polls or community functions on forums to just, eke a little bit more data out of users. And beyond that, the kind of functions that they provide. So one of the kind of cases that's got the most coverage is an app called Ovia, which enables you to embed kind of employers in health insurance. And again, in the US context, that is part of perhaps how you get your healthcare and how you access that app. But there isn't clear guidance to users about who is getting what data and how that's shared. I guess how much you're left in the dark as a user about the kind of second life that this data has beyond your use or what you directly input into the app, and then how kind of inferences get generated on that, and how that becomes part of things that make up your personas for data brokers, or how there's now a very real threat that data brokers are dealing with governments and police forces, and those are now customers of those entities as well. So, I mean, the threats now are just more and more dystopian as time goes on. I started this research in 2018, so yeah.
Yeah. Just thinking about it, sort of like, especially people, this sort of data, this sort of information has always been kept quite private. Obviously your periods, and especially even around fertility and everything like that. But what you're kind of suggesting is like, we went from sort of only talking to our closest and dearest, maybe our mothers and the doctor, to basically sharing it with all governments and anyone who's sort of data mining, which is quite extreme. But in that,
Completely.
to that point, you made a point in your PhD that not only do these apps share data and they overreaching and they're not as protected as they should be, they also kind of lean into menstruation stigma in general, that periods should be hidden. You should hide them from everyone around you, but just not the government. But they should be hidden and kept secret. And I'd love for you to elaborate on that a little bit more. How do you see period apps as part of the problem of menstruation stigma?
It's really difficult because it was really nuanced conversation when I particularly spoke to people using these apps. Like, there were so many different sides to the coin, because often the reason that people came to me to talk about this, when I kind of asked for people to speak about it, was because they felt quite open speaking about their period. They felt like they hadn't really got a lot of shame around it, and so I felt quite free to have those discussions with me. But it was difficult because then actually what people then said when we had these conversations was that, the app helps me to make sure that I never have a leak, or like I'm never caught off guard, or I'm never, it's always about that kind of, to be an academic, it's all kind of about that kind of disciplining work, I guess, that we do to our bodies to make sure that that leak is never visibilized or never breaks out into public life. And, you never kind of out yourself as someone who menstruates. So it's really difficult when those two things kind of interact. And that also I found really interactive with privacy as well, because when I asked people about how they felt about privacy, that was often met with an assumption that I expected, or rather that the reason that this data should be private is because it's menstrual data. And that's really difficult, because what we don't want privacy to do is it to reinforce shame or reinforce the idea that the reason that this data is private is because it's surrounded by taboo. And so I think that's a really difficult challenge as well going forward, because often I think those two things are linked without us always wanting them to be. And actually, it also impacts how these apps get kind of, I guess, presented to people as well, because there's also something about menstrual data that apparently makes it feel less health related than other forms. And so it's always, it's a really difficult kind of selection of things that come together with these apps that sometimes can kind of butt heads with one another as well.
I think even from our experience working in the menstrual context, we've always sort of, because it's health, but it's also deeply stigmatized health. And so there's one part of us that wants to go, be proud, who cares, go out there with, with your period, who cares, we bleed, we need to normalize it, which is absolutely true. But then we're always trying to balance that with the conversation of, but it is your health and it is about your body, and you should be free to sort of engage with this as much as you want. And no one else can sort of tell you how to feel about that. So if you don't want to be out there as sort of fighting the menstrual justice fight, that's fine as well, because it's a deeply personal thing. So I kind of understand what you're saying, like there's this crossroads, this cross section, and this nuance that's quite hard to balance against each other,
especially now when there's such real risks attached to it as well. So if you out yourself in this way, or that this, if you collect things that in your app that potentially now could mean, be used in trials and things like that, there's now, I think, compared to when I did this research, very, as I said, like very real harms attached to it as well.
Absolutely. There's another layer, just as we're sort of finding our way through to like normalize and make everything a bit better, a new risk has come. I want to talk a bit about this because you've made a point previously that various FemTech apps aren't actually adapted to people outside the gender binary. So you've kind of touched upon like marginalized groups and potentially because these apps are not really adapted for their use and these users have had to sort of reshape them to suit them, this actually puts them at a heightened risk. And I wanted to know more about this and for our audience to know more about this. How do you feel people outside the gender binary, so we're talking mask trans or non-binary, how is engaging with these apps putting them at a heightened risk?
I think part of it is that this is just not well studied. And I mean, my research, it was like something I tried to do, but it wasn't the focus point, because I think this needs its own research project. It needs its own investigation, because we just don't, as far as I know, really know the risks that, for example, trans people face when it comes to like how their data could be used. There is like where people have kind of talked about this. They have talked about the ways that, I guess, if you're facing any kind of marginalization, just the risks of sexual data or health data. I say sexual because it's kind of this concept of sexual privacy, which another researcher called, can I remember their name? I think Daniel Keats Citron really champions, which is the idea that data around any part of your sex life, whether that including things related to your reproductive health, come with a much greater weight when you are already marginalized, racialized, dealing with different forms of oppression, which obviously for trans people is such a real risk within this country and others. So but in terms of what that looks like in practice, there's just not enough out there about this, or not enough studied about this. But where I have seen really interesting examples, and again that's come up in my own research, is ways that people adapt the apps to fit their needs and like make a tool that is super heteronormative, that is pink and flowery, fit the experience, which is different from the very narrow understanding that the developers had when they made it. So that's examples of like friends sharing their cycle in order to help care for one another. There's also examples of, I guess these apps could be used if you are a trans woman trying to chart the experiences that you might have throughout the month, which, as far as we understand, could be cyclical, but you might not have a bleed, but you might have a kind of period. So it's trying to kind of get the kind of nuances of some of that out more clearly. I mean, I think that would be in itself a really, really interesting research project to
absolutely.
Just, I guess, better understand trans experiences when it comes to, or non-binary experiences, gender queer experiences when it comes to tracking what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to do a little plug for our own podcast, because on that note, Laura, that you made about it being incredibly interesting and actually charting the experiences of trans people going under hormone therapy, or even people on the contraceptive pill, we are actually going to be talking to the Gender Health Clinic in a future episode, and we're going to be learning all about that. So have to do the plug. It came up.
Nice. And can I talk a little bit about some of the apps that I think have got interesting developments in this regard?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. I think are really cool examples of where there are alternatives in this sector compared to the tidal wave of pink flowery, the only purpose of this is to make a baby kind of stuff, and you must have a male partner and be a cis woman kind of thing. So in particular, both Read Your Body and Drip make a really conscious effort to be inclusive in their design, in the kind of practices of the app as well. So being able to chart what you want, for example, so you can fit it to your body and your experience. I mean, just to name a couple of things that they do anyways. And equally, I also noticed, it must be a recent development in Clue, is that they now have an option to track with when you have no period, which is really interesting, because I think, again, that's just a much wider range of experiences, again, because you might be breastfeeding, you might be on the contraceptive pill or other contraceptives, you might be perimenopausal or menopausal. There's so many ways in which you might want to track aspects of your body, or even something about your cycle that isn't specific to cycles anymore. So I think that's really cool too.
Yeah, that's very cool, because actually taking it from a breastfeeding mum, I thought my period was coming at least 6 months before it came, because every month I started to feel like my hormones were going a bit shaky, but everything was out of whack, So it would have been really helpful to be like, oh, maybe my body is gearing up for it. It's just I'm still producing too much milk for it to really happen, So that is very interesting, and that is important. Absolutely. So this actually leads into a question that I had for you, because obviously you talk a lot about the risks and these companies being incredibly irresponsible, and governments now accessing private health data and sexual health data. And so one of my questions was, what are some do you see any work that's been done out there that outweighs this risk? Because obviously in the FemTech sphere, we're seeing developments in diagnostic menstrual pads, which are incredible for, a much overlooked part of gynecology, or just women's health in general. This idea that potentially if they create this, I think there are a few in the works at the moment, and maybe one's already prototyping, but if you could capture your menstrual blood and it could help you identify if you have polycystic ovary syndrome, for example. But that data goes to an app. So these products are being developed with an app in mind. And I wanted to ask you if you see that these health benefits are going to outweigh the risks and concerns, or if there's anything that you would hope to see these companies put in place to make sure that they remain safe and useful, rather than scary and dangerous.
Oh, I think it's again, it's like a nuanced question to ask, because I think that new developments can be really exciting, but often is it the thing that we need the most in order to kind of create different kinds of reproductive equity or justice, I think is a really difficult question, particularly because they can almost create new problems and new opportunities for the forms of oppression that we are already seeing at quite extensive scale. So there's another scholar who talks about this in terms of this thing called ectogenesis, which is basically artificial wombs, or artificial uteruses. And they make a really good point about how, for example, in case of like premature babies, this could be, a real revolution. But then if you think about the ways it could be used for reproductive harm, how could you strip away someone's reproductive autonomy because you decide that they are an unfit parent, unfit mother? And so you think there are opportunities then to create new forms of harm, or kind of roll back different forms of autonomy because of a new invention in which someone can actually decide new parameters around what is acceptable. Or
I did actually see something. Didn't Japan or China just create like this womb thing where it was just something that I just saw on social media?
Yeah. I read it a while ago. Yeah, so she makes a really good point about the ways that, for example, in an American context, like particularly Black women are already so persecuted by the state and by police and many other institutions in terms of their kind of fitness for motherhood, and we're seeing that in kind of criminalization of pregnant people, and so like how could this technology then create that? And obviously that's like a very kind of futuristic example, but I think when there are new developments, I always kind of end up looking at it with that kind of lens, thinking, okay, this has so much potential for good, I guess, in that finally you can understand you have these conditions without needing really invasive procedures, but equally like Could it ever be used to like further monitor or further surveil bodies that are already dealing with different kinds of oppression? I think that's always like the walk that I kind of toe, because even if it's not developed with groups with that in mind, you have to think that technology takes on a life of its own once it's out in the world. I mean, I bet the people that first designed period trackers, and I mean, the first apps came out in 2013, we weren't thinking like 12 years later that a government could subpoena that data and potentially use it in, you know, an abortion criminalization. And that is like now what we are dealing with. And so I think we have to think beyond the like next couple of years and think 10 years in advance. Is this going to be something that drives us forward? And also, are there things that we need to be doing that are much less tech focused or much less expensive even, that actually would do a lot to, for example, like changing family laws, like family leave laws, stuff like that, that is actually not about tech at all, but would actually really have a massive impact.
So technology is not the savior potentially that sort of everyone's riding on. So. Absolutely, 100%. I mean, they could start by just like maybe listening to women at the doctor's office.
Yeah, because technology can only ever be as kind of radical, I guess, as the society then, or as kind of equal. I'm sure someone else said that better than me, but you know, so if you're introducing a new technology into an unequal society, you have to think about how that unequal society will take it and change it.
Even with the best intentions.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, I have to fulfill transparency. Obviously here I have to talk about the fact that this is a podcast hosted by a period app. So, yes. But we are, for people who don't know about what the M scale is, it's basically a place where you can go and find a safe loo to manage your menstruation, which could also be feeding into your comment about menstruation stigma. I 100% am willing to look at it in that regard and think, oh, is this, you know, if you've had a leak or if you're going out, you're trying to find a safe bathroom, somewhere clean, but is that feeding into that idea that if you have a leak, you should immediately go and sort of sort it out or be hidden away? And we always, when we were developing the app, we wanted it to be really inclusive, and we wanted it to be a tool for people outside the gender binary as well, especially in the wake of sort of the Supreme Court ruling of what is a woman. It became incredibly important to a certain segment of society, essentially. And in that regard, we tried to make it as, like, it's very simple. It's still almost like a prototype app, to be honest, but we tried to separate. At no point can you access a user's review. So it's always like there is no function where you can find out who left the review. That is only with the data controller and us. I'm the data controller. And so we did that, and then all the reviews are anonymous, obviously, and it's not specific to Period House because you can leave a review at any point. It might be that you're more reminded to leave a review while you're on your period, but there's no way of verifying that. So I have those measures in place. We're hosted in the EU, which is kind of a little bit tighter and stricter. And upon doing my research with you, I went and redid our privacy policy to sort of tighten that up as well. But is there anything that you could suggest to us to sort of improve, or something that we should always be mindful of? You mentioned about, you know, we might have good intentions, but potentially we're an unequal society and it could be used for bad. I wanted to hear your thoughts on what we should be thinking about or what we could be doing to make sure it's safer for our users.
Oh, I feel bad. I don't want to go.
No, do it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, one thing I was wondering when you were speaking about it was, is there any chance that the app could ever be misused? So, for example, if someone is super transphobic, or I mean, there's a lot of people now that also hate women. Yeah. You know, that's the whole manosphere thing, you know. So could it ever be used? So you download this app and you see bathrooms that do fit people's needs, and you decide to interfere with that.
That's always been something that's been very, when we were developing it and thinking about, because we also thought about ways to sort of help people is doing geolocation, and then we got rid of that and we're like, no, that's too dangerous. So people can say where there's widgets where you can say it's a gender neutral bathroom, but you don't have to really flag that as like it's a trans safe. It's just, this is the fact. There are period products, there is a private sink, and there is a gender neutral bathroom. And so that's quite good. Our users do leave comments though. So they might say, hey, this was a really fantastic space. I felt really, really included here. And there is always that concern that someone might take that and use that for bad. No one has done so at this point, but we are sort of always trying to consider almost, what's that term for like super right wingers, like dog whistle, right? Like you want to like has shared, but like in a positive way. Like for us, it's like we want to share that there's this incredible tool out there, but not attract the wrong attention from the wrong people who might use it for hate.
That's really difficult, isn't it? Yeah, because I think that's what's nice about crowdsourcing something like this, isn't it? Is that, yeah, you get like all of these people's, you know, it's like a kind of like community tool then, isn't it? But then with it being open, you can't ever control who uses it, which is good. But yeah, now there's like real threats out there, aren't there?
Yeah, I guess we just have to keep monitoring and be very careful, and we do use email verification for the reviews. For like, they have to have a login because we have to make sure that they're somewhat verified, like they are a real person when they leave this review. But something that we should always be thinking about, I think, is to make sure that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands and attract the wrong
and I guess if you're monitoring that as well, like you're providing some of that safety work, because also I guess that's something that doesn't happen on bigger corporations, you know, like, or like,
people who are very successful, you mean? Yes, there is a positive.
Because I think big corporations don't take the safety of women and people of marginalised genders seriously, and like the ways that their platforms contribute to the harms they deal with on a daily basis. So it sounds like that's happening at M-Scale.
Oh, that's good. Well, I'm going to continue to follow your research, obviously, and then always make sure that I'm having real conversations with myself and our team about what we should be doing to make sure that everyone is as safe as possible.
It's quite nice to know my research has a practical use as well. So it's very nice to hear.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got one tiny period app to change their privacy policy. So there you go.
I'm very happy with that.
Maybe some more tiny period apps will change their privacy policies after hearing this podcast as well. We're going to take a little break on that point to talk you through some of the latest developments in women's health. You may not have heard these stories in the news, so we're bringing them directly to you. Earlier this year, Portugal enacted a landmark law granting 3 paid days of menstrual leave per month for workers diagnosed with endometriosis and adenomyosis. The new regulation, which came into force in April 2025, allows these absences without the need for a medical certificate each month, once a diagnosis is established through the public health system. The measure is presented as an effort to integrate menstrual health into labour rights and has drawn attention as a possible model for other nations considering similar protections. Mary E. Branco, an American immunologist, is one of the winners of the 2025 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, honoured for her groundbreaking work showing how the immune system avoids attacking the body's own tissue. Her research, together with colleagues Fred Ramstor and Shimon Sakaguchi, revealed how so-called regulatory T cells act as a brake on the immune system, preventing autoimmune diseases. Branco, based in Seattle and working for the Institute for Systems Biology, was surprised awake by the news as her husband shared the announcement with her early Monday morning. Her findings, particularly identifying a gene called FOXP3 linked to immune regulation, have opened doors to new treatments for autoimmune conditions and improved understanding of how to control immune responses. And finally, a new line of research could transform understanding and treatment of endometriosis, a painful condition affecting about 1 in 10 women of reproductive age. NPR reports that scientist Katie Burns, who has lived with endometriosis since childhood, discovered evidence that the immune system, not just hormones, may trigger the disease. Her experiments in mice revealed that even without estrogen, lesions could form, suggesting immune cells like macrophages and neutrophils may have helped endometrial tissue grow where it shouldn't. Experts say that this could open the door to new immune-based therapies and a non-invasive diagnostic test using menstrual fluid, replacing surgery as the only current way to confirm the disease. But researchers warn that progress is hampered by low funding. Surprise, surprise. With the US National Institutes of Health spending less than 0.03% of its budget on endometriosis. Katie Burns says she's determined to keep pushing forward for herself and for the next generation of girls living with pain that too often goes ignored. M-Talk is brought to you by the M-Scale, helping you find a clean and safe bathroom to manage your period with our app. You can download from the Play and App Store and leave reviews for some stellar loos or name and shame those underperforming. So we haven't had a moment to talk about it, but I do want to talk about it. It's like how you got into this work, how this became interesting to you. Yeah, it's niche, I would say. So
Yeah.
how did you get here?
Oh, many things happened, I think, all at the same time. But it was born partly out of frustration, which I think probably it speaks to a lot of FemTech inventions generally, doesn't it? But I think it partly came through, obviously, I was starting a PhD program. It's based in cybersecurity. I was looking at kind of, I guess, some of the core privacy and security challenges at the time, and like doing kind of practical, or like doing like lectures on that and things like that, having but being taught around a lot of those things. But I also at the same time got really interested in the world of kind of contraception, basically through another course I was doing, which is focused on gender and sexuality, and I guess some of the labour that has kind of accompanied that in the past. And then just went for dinner with my friends, and they were talking about how much they loved natural cycles, and I was like, oh my god, what's natural cycles? And they both absolutely loved natural cycles for looking after, like, I guess, their contraceptive practices, and it had been revolutionary for them. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so interesting. Like, I wonder if anyone's looking at that. And then spending my day to day looking at privacy and security, I went straight to look at, like, okay, are people interested in this? Like, I wonder if it's been studied. And just found it hadn't really. Like, there were a couple of reports from kind of privacy foundations like EFF who had looked at like pregnancy tracking. There had been a couple of media stories around, there was an app called Baby Center that had like misused user data. And that was kind of it. Like, that's all I can really remember anyway of the things that kind of stuck out at the time. And also this was like on the kind of beginnings of GDPR coming into force. So it's the beginning of 2018. So I was just like, I would love to look at this. I would love to study it, look at the privacy and security of some of these apps and just understand what's going on. So I started off doing, with the help of my supervisor, doing some kind of security explorations, and then found that actually on the whole things weren't too bad, but there were some kind of questionable privacy practices. For example, lots of apps didn't have privacy policies. Lots of apps hadn't updated their policy since GDPR had come in. So even though we knew that the rights of the user are completely different and require very different care, for example, period data could come under sensitive information, which, you know, under GDPR means that period data is a special category of data, so it requires very different care from, for example, information about your where you live or your email address. So then I dug more into that and ended up doing a privacy review of around kind of 90% of the app download market. And again, just found just the practices varied wildly across the sector, and that you have femtech companies, that some of which are doing great things or trying to really think about privacy and security in terms of their users. Other people are using poorly implemented software kits that are sharing information with Facebook. So, you know, there's like such a like radical set of changes. And then I got really interested in the companies. So explored femtech as a sector and trying to understand what kind of governed its kind of modes of operation, like what were some of the kind of key facets of the industry, and then trying to understand what role these apps had in people's lives, like how do they relate to them, how does it shape their relationship with their period and their body. So then that made up
the whole
PhD. So all of that, yeah.
Wow, speaking of, you sort of mentioned Facebook there. I mean, we are recording this in September for anyone who's listening to know, because it's going to come out a little bit later, but we are recording this in September, and Meta have just been ruled against in California for accessing Flow, the period tracking app. They illegally access data, and then I think I read a statistic where it's like knowing someone is pregnant or trying to get pregnant is data that is worth 5 times more than sort of standard data. So like obviously for Meta, this meant that they were targeting people with advertising from the data they were getting from Flow. They've had a huge fine, I'm pretty sure. I think they haven't released the fine yet at this point. I think it's like they could be like $190 billion or something was the figure I saw.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've not seen this.
Yeah, because it's basically every single person who had their data accessed can get a certain amount, and it adds up to something like 190 billion, which I will fact check and correct if I have to for this episode. But this is sort of a big case. This is a big case that happened in California. Do you think that this is going to send a message to some of these bigger femtech companies to sort of tighten their ship and get a bit more serious about their users' privacy?
I hope so. I think it will. I think already, I mean, some have already moved to do so. I think because there was such, when Roe versus Wade was overturned, there was such a kind of conscious raising around, I guess, some of the risks that come with this data, and kind of period tracking was, I think, quite at the heart of that conversation. Already a lot of companies have thought very rigorous, or tried to think quite rigorously about how they are dealing with this, and now make it kind of part of the package, which is really interesting, how privacy kind of gets marketized as a like product in itself. So some companies are trying to really kind of make that their selling point and say, like, if you want a private app, come to us, because we will make sure that your data is safe, because we are, for example, are in the EU versus the US context and stuff like that. So, but I think, I mean, it's really encouraging to know that there is actual money and fines being levied at these huge organizations, and with the hope that it kind of tries to rein them in a little bit. Because Facebook, so this was exposed partly through Privacy International's kind of report on the state of menstrual tracking, and at the time kind of washed their hands of it and said, it's not my problem, because it's all about how developers implement it's called a software development kit.
They washed their hands of it. They said it's not our fault that they set up there. It's like a burglar saying, it's not my fault you left your window open.
Exactly. Because this is something that the developers should implement better, and if they've they haven't turned off the thing that sends us all the data, then that's bad. And also, like, initially it was kind of assumed that you can infer things as much, because it's not like it would include things like the metadata from the app as well, which, you know, might be less kind of, oh, this was when such and such period was, but there was still so much that could be built from that information. And it did in fact include things like ovulation and all of those core kind of user inputted data that is obviously now really, as we know, really sensitive. And I guess we can never know, like, of being on the outside, how they use that. And I don't think they're going to be really as public as that as we should probably demand. Yeah, there's just like big concerns, because I think the challenge with any kind of data is that behind the proprietary doors, we don't understand the level of granularity, how it gets used, how it makes inferences, and then the life that it has, as I said earlier, like beyond that one company. And so, yeah, the fact that Facebook had all of that data is just kind of quite horrifying. So yeah, to answer your question, I really hope it does, because yeah, I think there's such power discrepancy between you as a user using this app and just what a company has to gain from this data. So
yeah, absolutely. I hope so. When I saw it, I was like, I also hope Meta just pay some money for something at some point. Like when we were doing research on this, Katie, our development producer, was like, God, Facebook are bad. Like, you thought they would have learned from Cambridge Analytica, but it's just like they're out of control.
Oh no. Yeah, it is wild, isn't it? It's so, I think they're terrifying as a company, to be honest. And like the fact that they have access to two of like the biggest, or three of the biggest, I guess I forget that Facebook exists, but three huge platforms that govern like how we communicate with each other. It's wild.
And we are going to be advertising this podcast on Meta platforms. So everything we just said, we're sorry, we love you, Meta. We know you're doing great work. Please don't shadow ban us. No, if you had one message to people out there, like, I know obviously we've talked a lot about being more cautious about what you share, but if you had one message to people listening to this, what would it be? After everything you've researched, after all the work you've done, what would you hope, if it's not going to come from a government level, then if it has to come from a personal responsibility level, which it shouldn't, but maybe is at this moment, what is that sort of lesson? What would you be saying to these people to help protect them?
I think just, if you can, do a little bit of research about your app. See if it's been in any news kind of stories. For example, Flow has like, I can't even remember, it's something like 40 million or 100 million users, a huge amount of users. So like, I wonder how many of them know about this FTC ruling and the California ruling, and, you know, just how much, I guess, has been traded about them. So I think just doing a little bit of research about like what your app is there any kind of red flags around your app, because there's been others as well that, you know, that just have some question marks around them. I think the other thing I found is that these apps are so vital. Like, people rely on them so much and they mean so much. So to say that you shouldn't use them, I think is really hard. But if you're going to use one, just try and pick carefully. So again, do some research. Like, can you find a privacy first one? As I said, Read Your Body and Drip are two great apps. There are others as well. There's one called Yuki, for example, that's made by the World Health Organization. So there are some alternatives. So if you can and you feel like you're able to, try and migrate to a different app. And if you do, ask that your previous data is deleted. Because, for example, in the EU, if your app is in the EU, then or you're an EU citizen / UK citizen, then you have the right to data deletion. So yeah, I think those would be the pieces of advice I give.
That's good. No, but I think it's really important. I think people need to understand, because when GDPR came out, there was so much noise around it and everyone thought that it was just going to make their inbox clear overnight. Like, that's what everyone thought was going to happen with GDPR. I remember I actually did natural cycles around the same time GDPR. Like, when you were talking about 2000, 2008, 17, 18, I was like, oh, yeah, I remember all of this. And we all thought, oh, our emails are just going to clear overnight, and that's what this GDPR thing is. But obviously, since having implemented GDPR policies after that from my companies that I work for, and then also for the M scale and making sure we're really tightened up, I know that you can get your data deleted and you have to be able to contact someone in order to do that.
Yeah.
I think big companies can kind of make it a more fluid process, but you should always be able to talk to someone about getting rid of your data. And I don't think that message got out there as much when we were talking about GDPR. So I think it's really important that you shared that, because I think everyone should know that they have a right to sort of scrub themselves from different applications or companies.
And you can even ask to see it as well. You also have the right to
get it all
have a portable copy. Yeah, exactly. And I did that for a couple of apps I was using as part of my research. And that was like, I mean, some of them just didn't reply as well. So already failed.
Did you send them send them to the sort of, I don't know who takes care of all of this. Who do you report this to?
I guess for me, it would be the ICO probably.
Oh, yeah.
I should have done that, actually. That would have been a really cool thing to do next, but I've just kind of let it slide. And also, when I was tracking, I also used fake information as well. And that's another thing you can always do. You don't have to give a date of birth. You can call yourself whatever you like. Like iCloud now, you can make a burner email very easily. You can do things like that as well to just try and take a level of abstraction from you out of the equation. Because I think just saying don't track is just not a reality that people have. So
also it's like, why once again are we penalized for like finally something's becoming a bit easier, and we're learning about our bodies, and it's really fantastic, and yet because of this sort of unequal society that you mentioned, to not engage with this technology is basically being penalized, because once again, we can't have nice things. Okay, I think this about wraps us up here. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much for talking to us today, Dr. Laura Shipp. It is fantastic. And
thank you.
I think that our listeners will really benefit from hearing about this. You've definitely given us something to think about as well, to always be sort of mindful of our users. Where can our listeners find your work if they want to engage with sort of some of the work that you've done? I can link it to this podcast, but is there anywhere that you can sort of direct our listeners to sort of find out more about what you're doing?
Probably just my papers, which is very boring. But just my papers, and my PhD is available to read online if that's of use. It's very long, so apologies.
Fantastic, thank you. And we are friends with quite a lot of sort of similar level apps to us, so we'll be sharing this episode with all of them as well, to be like, look, maybe just give your privacy policy another look at, and then think about your users' privacy.
Oh, nice.
So that is us for today. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and have a lovely day.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Wow, that was both fascinating and terrifying at the same time. If you enjoyed this talk and you want to know more, we've uploaded helpful information to our website in support of this episode. You can find that at themscale.com, all one word. You can also download our app and subscribe to our content and more. And thank you for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe. Even just talking about us at the pub is super helpful. So whatever you can do to spread the word, we really appreciate it. Also, don't be afraid to get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. You can email us at admin@themscale.com. Until next time, have a lovely rest of your day. Ciao.